Hi everyone, welcome to Outgrow's seasonal webinar. This time we are going to talk about how you and your business can adapt to the changing needs of a post-pandemic world, and especially a world that is seeing a rapid economic boom across the board. Now, before I continue, I want everyone who has registered for the webinar to know that you can claim a special 1-month extended trial of Outgrow, which you can use to make funnels, quizzes, calculators, contests, chatbots, forms, tests, and e-commerce recommendations. There are more than 1,000 templates available at the outgrow.co website that you can easily adapt for your business during this trial period. But anyway, coming back to the point at hand, post-pandemic shifts in customer preferences are expected to be significant. The Economist and the Wall Street Journal both predict that a historic economic boom is just around the corner. New business formation is surging across the world as entrepreneurs seek to fill gaps in the market. Growth and marketing strategies during this period will therefore need significant changes, if not a complete overhaul. We're going to have 5 panels to explore this topic. The first panel is with Yelp and Freshworks and is about how customer engagement has been revolutionized in the post-pandemic world. The second panel is with Rand Fishkin and Entreport and is about revised marketing and advertising strategies for the post-pandemic economic boom. The third panel is with Alibaba and Zoho and is about small and medium business tactics for the post-pandemic economic boom. The fourth panel is with Zapier and Aweber and is about automation and growth hacks in the post-pandemic economic boom. And finally, the fifth panel is with Unbounce and ConnectWell and is about landing page and interactive engagement in the post-pandemic economic boom. Welcome to Panel D. We are here with Jono Loeser, Senior Partner Manager at Zapier, and Zach Gray, Senior Product Manager at Aweber, and they're going to talk about automation and growth hacks in the post-pandemic economic boom. So without further ado, let's go on to the rapid fire round. Texting or talking?
Talking.
Your personal marketing mantra?
Don't eat anything bigger than your head. That's actually a funny one.
Test everything.
Favorite day of the week?
Saturday.
Sunday.
Scale of 1 to 10, how good of a driver are you?
7.
Say a 7.
2022's biggest marketing trend?
Automation. There we go.
Continued online presence.
Name one of the 7 dwarves.
Drowsy?
Sleepy.
How many cups of coffee do you drink per day?
0. I do drink tea sometimes, though.
2.
What's something you could eat for a week straight?
Love rice and beans, so I could eat rice and beans for probably even longer than a week straight.
Chick-fil-A. That's tough. There's crack in it. I'm convinced.
Zapier. Small and medium businesses have to juggle so many different web apps to make things work. What is an easy solution to this?
Well, this is a great question. And in short, the answer is automation is an easy solution to this. But before I hop into why that is, I want to give you a little bit of background on Zapier, so you know why I know just a little bit about automation. So Zapier is the global leader in easy automation for small business. Our platform has the largest network of SaaS partners in the industry and connects to all of the essential apps small and medium-sized businesses need to automate everyday tasks. So for example, automating lead management, project management, personal productivity, or any other task is just as easy as turning on a Zap. Now, getting back to that question, in 2020, many non-digital SMBs went digital, and companies which were already digital had to get more sophisticated and add more tools and just get smarter to stay ahead. So our data from our usage really shows that. We saw in the beginning of 2020 a huge explosion in COVID-19 related automations. So just a few examples of that would be automating curbside pickup to quickly processing new leads. And the reason why SMBs did this was they needed to increase productivity, connect their software together because they're using more and more different types of software, and create scalable systems that doesn't require a lot of like manual effort. And it made a huge difference. So I think actually just earlier this year, we surveyed 2,000 US knowledge workers from small and medium-sized businesses. And 63% of those SMB workers say that automation allowed their company to quickly pivot as a result of the pandemic. And so some examples of pivoting was, bringing their goods and services online, or we even heard about, businesses changing their business models completely. And that benefit is not likely to shrink. Even as things get back to normal, and I don't even know what getting back to normal means at this point. But the fact is, we just live more of our lives online, whether that be personally or in work. So small businesses are already using technology to prepare for that reality. 66% of small and medium businesses say that automation is now essential for running their business. And the last stat that I am going to drop that I think is a really cool one is 88% of these knowledge workers that we talked to said that automation allows their company to compete with larger businesses. So I love that. That's part of the reason why I love working for Zapier, is it really is a true tool for the people to help the small businesses keep up with those large businesses.
How important was automation during the digital boom we saw in the pandemic, and how important is it going to be in the post-pandemic digital space?
This is a great question, because in my last response, I dropped all these great stats about how Zapier and automation helps SMB. But I think probably a lot of people who are watching this don't know what automation is. So it's very abstract. So what I want to do is show you an example. So let's go ahead and imagine that I am a 10-person digital marketing agency. And my name is JLo Marketing. As you can see, we really wanted to make a splash with the name. So what I do is I help customers out with items such as SEO and social media strategy. My sweet spot is small, deliverable-based work. So it's integral that that I really keep the flow of prospects coming. And I have lots of clients at any given time. So using this as an example, let's see how Zapier can help me. So with a name like JLo Marketing and great customer referrals, from the beginning, I've always had a really solid flow of inbound prospects. I use Outgrow on my website to have prospects let me know through a form that they are interested and want to work with me. So before Zapier, I actually used to manually import spreadsheets into my CRM once a day to make sure that my customer info is up to date. This was getting super unwieldy, and my prospects and customers were suffering. Some customers would get multiple emails a day, and some would get none and just kind of sit there. On top of all that, I'm actually taking some of my day to manually do this just really boring task that I don't really want to be doing. So overall, this is just not a great situation. So now I use Zapier. And I'll tell you what the flow is. So once the client completes the application on Outgrow, which is on my website, Zapier creates a contact in my CRM and marketing automation system, and it applies a hot lead tag to it. So I'm using Keep, but really you can use any CRM that you want. And some CRMs these days, have marketing automation combined. In this example, it does. But also, if you just have a CRM that doesn't, and you need to connect those two, Zapier can do that as well. And that's a really common use case. So here, once I have these contacts in Keep, there are actually easy automations from within Keep to send out those emails automatically and to continue to kind of foster those leads. Now, in the beginning, I was able to run my business all off inbound leads. But now that I'm starting to grow, I'm experimenting with paid ads as well. So I start paying for some ads through Facebook, LinkedIn, and Google. I learned the hard way the first time around with my experience with inbound leads from my website that I don't want to be updating these leads manually into my CRM. So from the very beginning this time, I use Zapier with Keep I use Zapier to update my CRM when users are interacting with my paid ads. Now, since everything is organized and documented in my CRM, not only can I super efficiently follow up with all my leads, but I can also track which acquisition channels are providing the most ROI so I can allocate more resources there. And the last use case that I'm going to call out too has to do with my scheduling tools. So, while I already have automated emails coming out from my CRM, there's one little additional touch that I want to add. So I use a scheduling tool, and I use Calendly, but you can use, really anything. And when users schedule a meeting through Zapier, their contact is updated in my CRM. So now I know within my CRM if they have just been emailed or if they've actually scheduled a meeting. And I can have two different sequences based on that. If they haven't scheduled yet, they stay in one email sequence to try to get them to schedule that meeting. And if not, I move them into another email sequence to follow up post meeting. So again, this keeps all of my data super updated in my CRM. And this allows me to provide the best experience to my customers. So in this short example, you can see how I use Outgrow with Zapier to easily follow up and organize all of my inbound leads and leads from paid ads. It's all totally automated, so I can focus on what matters, which is helping my clients. And another thing that I didn't call out explicitly, but you can see in this example, is I get to pick and choose what the best tools are for my business. I don't have to worry about which tools have native integrations with each other because I know that Zapier integrates with all of them, and I know I'm covered with Zapier. So these are just a couple ways that you can use Outgrow with Zapier. But it is good to know that with over 4,000 apps that Zapier connects to, the possibilities are really endless.
What are some of the key things one needs to know about automating one's business, marketing, and sales, and what tools can one use for it?
Well, Zapier has some great resources. I referenced in the first response, I referenced some stats from our 2021 State of Business Automation report. And I definitely recommend checking that out. It's a really good place to start. It's not too long. And it helps paint the picture why automation is so important for SMBs in the current era. Additionally, we have a really, really incredible blog team. And it's really geared towards small and medium-sized businesses. A lot of it is about automation, but a lot of it also is just like other tips about how tips and use and case studies about how SMBs can really thrive. So some of the sections that I like the most is the small business tips section and the best apps section. So if you just Google Zapier blog and then go to find those two sections, I'd really recommend that. And then the last resource that I'd really recommend to check out is we are actually having our first annual user conference on October 21st. Importantly, it is totally free. So the objective of this conference is to help folks find new use cases for automation. So I think if you're just kind of hearing about automation now and you want to see how you can start with automation and for your SMB, I think this will be a really great place to start and even kind of meet other SMBs who are already using automation. So if you want to check that out and potentially sign up for that, I would just Google 2021 Zap Connect, and you can sign up for free. So those are just a couple resources to get you started on automation.
For Zapier Aweber, how do I growth hack a new product or service I want to sell?
That's a great question. Really great question. I think one of the first things that anyone can focus on when they're growth hacking is keep it separate. So don't, there can be a tendency to want to say, hey, let me use the existing tools I have. Let me fit it into what I'm already doing. And what I would say is part of growth hacking is iterating quickly and trying things quickly. And ultimately, the best thing to do is to keep it separate because that gives you a lot more flexibility when it comes time to make adjustments, change your decisions, go in a different direction. And then all of a sudden, you're not held back by the fact that you're using an existing tool. I would also say to just test. That's simple. Just test and don't overthink it. Test this, try something else, test it, try something else, test it, and keep testing. If you're not testing at any point, then you should be asking yourself, why am I not testing something? And what can I do to test something else in the process that I can ultimately validate and get better information to know that I'm making the right decisions. Also, I would say I would intentionally put a constraint on your project of I'm only going to use free tools. And this is a really great way to just get a sense of if the solution's going to work. Because remember, that's what you're doing. You're putting something out there saying, I think this is going to work. I think this makes sense. And so if you need tools to support that, tools like, Aweber has a free tool, Canva has a free tool, Unsplash has a free tool, all kinds of these great little tools. Use those before you start looking to make an investment. And one of the biggest reasons is that you may ultimately realize that that's not even the tool you wanted, and you already paid for a month or a year or whatever of that product. And also, if it's available through the free, then paid options, because every one of those kind of products has some kind of a paid option in it, then you'll be able to just simply confidently pay for the paid option to get all the additional functionality. But just getting the concept started, you don't want to rack up a bill before you got started there. And so ultimately, you want to be able to say, I know that with using a handful of tools that ultimately I can make everything work and I can get the concept up and running so that I can continue to hack on the idea. And the last part is, I would say start manually, then move to automation. And so that's a really important part of what everyone's looking at, is that everyone's very interested in automating, and that's a great thing. Everybody wanting to automate and simplify, you can't argue with that, except when you're trying this philosophy of growth hacking. You really want to stay manual and validate the idea, validate that things are working, and then you can go through and automate. But the big thing you're trying to do there is you're trying to actually save a bunch of wasted time. Because if you start automating and then you realize that what you're trying to offer isn't going to make sense or needs to be dramatically changed, you've spent a lot of time automating nothing. And so ultimately, sometimes it might just be as simple as somebody bought something, and the very first couple, you just hand email the person what they're asking for, what they're looking for. Ultimately, don't get too automated before you realize that something is or is not working. And so that's definitely a big piece of kind of putting this all together. Keep it separate, think fast, test things always, use free tools, and start with manual, then go to automated.
What has the pandemic taught us about communicating with an audience?
Well, it's taught us a lot. Lots of really great stuff. I mean, one of them is the simplest one that I think people encountered early on was, since the pandemic was so abrupt, it was, hey, we have something kind of going on, and then all of a sudden everybody's shutting down. Because of that, people who were keeping their audiences engaged with new content or new services or new whatever, they were the ones who had a built-in audience to generate more content for, or to sell something to. All of that was there because they were nurturing their audience, or the people that were interested in their products or services or website. And so the people who weren't prepared, they ultimately did catch traction, but it took them a lot longer, because all of a sudden, an audience that they weren't communicating with, they weren't putting out posts on Facebook or Instagram, or weren't sending emails or whatever they wanted to use. Since they weren't doing that often enough, they were all of a sudden saying, hey, I'm here. And eventually, again, their audience did turn around and say, hey, okay, yeah, absolutely. But it kind of took their audience a little bit of like, hey, yeah, I do like these people. So definitely I would say continue to think about how you can engage your audience. There's a number of different ways you can do it. There's no necessarily right or wrong answer, except for the fact that you definitely want to do it different ways, because everybody wants to be communicated in different ways. And ultimately, the most important part about that is that you consistently and continually do it. And that can just be something as simple as like, I just keep forgetting. Okay, create a calendar reminder. That works too. I mean, it can be just as simple as that, to remind you to send some type of communication out to those individuals, because that's the piece that you want to keep. Just similar to when you're trying to sell something, you're trying to keep warm leads. That idea is like you want to just keep your audience warm. So whether you're going to be selling them something or offering them some type of content or something else, you just want to keep that conversation warm. Also, one of the things that we noticed during this time is that people were experiencing the side effects of social media, meaning as a creator, as a seller, they were realizing that, oh, I have this great audience and I have it on Instagram or I have it on Facebook or I have it on TikTok or any of these platforms. And they have this great audience and then they get suspended or they get banned or Facebook changes their algorithm. And all of a sudden, now they're not getting many views. And immediately the problem was, oh my gosh, I had this captive audience and they're gone and I have no way to get them back. I'm calling Facebook and they're not answering. So ultimately, how do you tackle that? How do you deal with that issue? And basically what we've continued to focus on at Aweber, and I want to encourage everybody to think about is email is really your base. You think about email. Email has always been compared to a mailbox out in front of your house. And it's the idea is that it's at your location. It's at where you're at. It's your direct connection to the rest of the world. And so we always encourage people, use email and then use the other tools and absolutely communicate with people in those areas, but always encourage them to come back and provide you the email address so that you can have that information, you can store it. Because if something happens to your Facebook group, if something happens to one of these other areas, you can still communicate with everybody and you still have that audience. And that's something that's just great to remember, because when it's email addresses, you own them. When it's people on Facebook, people on Instagram, any of those situations, those companies own those contacts. And so that's just a great way to remember. Always use email as your base and then jump off from there. And that'll guarantee that you always have direct communication with your audience. Another one is be authentic. That's a really big thing that I'm noticing, which is as people are working through and communicating with their audiences, if you're not being authentic with the people that you're communicating with, that's really, really important. It's becoming definitely a trend and a thing that everybody wants to see and feel. They want to feel that that the person they're speaking with is another person, and also they don't want to necessarily feel that they're being directly sold to, even though they know they're in a sales environment. So they ultimately just want you to be authentic, and that's going to go a long way in any type of communication. Because as soon as you're not being authentic, you're going to have issues with people just tuning you out. Or even in the email world, they're going to unsubscribe. So there's lots of things that you want to do to try to say, hey, am I being authentic? And that kind of steps into the last part of what I want to say, which is really it comes down to focusing on what the reader or the buyer or whoever you're communicating with, what they're hoping to solve. Why are they talking to you? Why are they part of your audience? And that ultimately, it's not about what you offer. It's about what they need solved, and they're hoping that you can solve. So you're offering as an extension of the problem that they're having. And so just make sure that as you're communicating it, that's the way you're communicating. You're communicating it about the problem that they have and that you have this great solution to solve it. So definitely making sure you keep those in the right order. It's very easy to kind of flip the order of those. And it creates a little bit of disconnect, a little bit of a disconnection with people, because when they're reading it, they're saying, oh yeah, I kind of see myself in it, but you keep trying to sell me something. And so if you switch that order and say, hey, isn't this problem you're having? Oh, great, we have a great solution for it. So definitely just tailoring that to your audience is really big as well.
How can people sharpen their focus in a post-pandemic world?
Let me start off with, don't be afraid to question the things you've been doing. I know that can be scary at times. That can create a little bit of anxiety, but ultimately, it's really important that you figure out what still makes sense. And that could be eliminating a product. That could be eliminating a tool. That could be making a change to automate something. That could be a number of different things that you're trying to do. So ultimately, just make sure that you're questioning these things. I mean, one of the great examples is that I've spoken with people who they say, oh, wow, that's so great. Yeah. Oh, I don't need to do that anymore. Or I don't need to, I don't know I've ever been doing this thing. I'll just do this other thing. And so sometimes less is more. Sometimes you need to look at it and with a critical eye. And sometimes if that critical eye, you don't feel like you can do that, then bring in a friend who knows what you're doing and knows what's going on, or bring in a coworker and say, hey, I really need to potentially pull back on some of this, or I really need to make sure that I'm focusing just on the right things. Because if I'm going to sharpen my focus, I can't have all this extra stuff. I need to know it's all important, that what we have. And so that's a really important thing to do. I know that it sounds a little bit easy to say, but ultimately it's really a really great way to focus on it is something that actually I heard from Elon Musk, which is he was talking about the idea of, hey, you should be looking to eliminate parts. He's talking about his rocket, and he's like, it's like, hey, at SpaceX, we're looking to eliminate parts because we want to know that only the right parts are there. The same kind of concept. As you're growth hacking, as you're sharpening your focus, is just to basically say, hey, what doesn't need to be here? Because those are the things that are getting in my way. And I would also say another thing to really focus on is finding the right tools. And so everybody experienced this to some level or during the pandemic, which was they didn't have the right tools they needed, and then they started to seek out the right tools. And it was a challenge for them because they were essentially, building their airplane while in flight. They still had to have their business and communicate, but ultimately the question was, well, how do I do that? But I don't have the right tools, and so I need to go find them while I'm doing that. And really, I think some of the things to pay attention to is, as you're looking for the right tools, if the tool isn't solving the problems you have, then ultimately that's something you should start to look around. Now, you may not ever find a tool that perfectly solves your problems, but there are plenty of tools that you realize, oh, I never knew, I never realized, I never got around to testing this tool, and it's a much better tool than what I have. Or you might just find a tool that, oh wow, I can save a couple bucks because this free one does just as well, and I like this platform, and therefore I don't need this extra tool. And then some of it comes down to customer service. I think that's been an area that people have really recognized during the pandemic, which is, I'm having a problem, how do I get it answered? And you're having high call volumes. Every 800 number that I call for different customer service groups, we're having high call volumes due to the pandemic. Everybody's having these challenges, and as they're reaching out, people are realizing, oh, I didn't realize this was the customer experience from this company, and it's either good or it's poor. And so that's definitely something to consider as well, because when you have a problem and it's impeding your ability to make progress, or it's impeding you to make sales, or you're impeding you to ultimately speak to your audience, then you really need to say, maybe the customer service part is a big part of it. Knowing that they have service 24/7, or knowing that they have experts that you directly have access to. You're not just getting like maybe a generic person. All of these things that those may or may not be important to you, but it's really important to ask that question. It's important to say, hey, when I have a problem, what kind of service am I going to get from the different tools I'm using? Because when I don't have those answers, or I don't know, when we talk about sharpening your focus, you're losing all of that because you're having to spend all this time kind of in a situation you don't want to be in already, but then it's taking you away from all the things you should be looking at doing. Another area that is really important, and it kind of fits into the first one a little bit, which is sometimes less is more. And so really, ultimately, the thing that you really should do is try to identify areas where there's too much investment. We are saying either there's too much monetary investment or there's too much time investment. And essentially, you're going to just break that down into 3 different things. Either you're going to automate, you're going to accept, or you're going to eliminate. So you're either going to automate that step and make it really simple so it's not in your way as much. You're going to just accept that that's an important part of what you do. For instance, a painter can't say, let me automate the painting job. Ultimately the artist that's what they do, is to paint the actual canvas. So, and then the third one is eliminate. It's just to say, you know what, actually, I don't really need this. This thing is taking too much time, and I'm just not going to do it anymore. And so definitely frame your thoughts under that category of automate, accept, and eliminate. And the last part I would say is just be an active listener in this post-pandemic world with these audiences that you now have. People are coming out of the pandemic in a different way than they went in. Sometimes it'll be subtle, and sometimes it'll be bigger, but we're all going to be learning this together at the same time. And so it's really important to be listening and asking your audiences and getting a better sense of what you should and shouldn't be doing, because as we get out of it and we start to move into whatever that post-pandemic world looks like, there's definitely going to be changes, and there's not necessarily going to be immediately anybody telling you what changed, because we need time to understand it. So during that time, just make sure that you're really paying attention to what people are saying, and you have a built-in audience, you have a built-in group of people that you're trying to speak with, so speak with them. You'd be surprised how often that people are more than happy to speak with you and to tell their story, and for you to understand and ultimately understand how maybe you should change what you're doing.